Imagine you're standing on the deck of a wooden ship, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. There's no port in sight, no dry dock, no hardware store, no coast guard. Just you, 300 miles of open water in every direction, and a vessel that is actively trying to fall apart beneath your feet. Now imagine that same ship is crewed by pirates, wanted men who can never pull into a friendly harbor for repairs without risking capture and execution. Here's what most people get wrong about the golden age of piracy. They think the biggest threat was Navy warships, rival pirates, or tropical storms. It wasn't. The biggest threat was the ship itself. Every single day, a pirate vessel was losing the war against wood rot, saltwater, biological invaders, snapping ropes, and the relentless physics of the open ocean. And the men who sailed those ships had to become engineers, chemists, carpenters, and sailors simultaneously, or they died. Today, we're going deep into the world of pirate ship maintenance, the real stuff, the unglamorous, back-breaking, ingenious engineering that kept these floating fortresses alive. Stick around, because some of what I'm about to tell you is genuinely hard to believe. Before we can talk about maintenance, you need to understand what pirates were actually working with. Contrary to what Hollywood gives us, pirates didn't sail massive, towering ships by default. The most popular vessel among pirates during the Golden Age, roughly 1650 to 1730, was the sloop. The sloop was a single-masted, shallow-draft vessel, typically between 40 and 60 feet long. It was fast, it was agile, it could chase down merchant ships and, crucially, escape into shallow coastal waters where a Royal Navy frigate couldn't follow. Blackbeard, one of history's most infamous pirates, famously favored the Queen Anne's Revenge, a converted French slave ship. Bartholomew Roberts, who captured over 400 ships in his career, more than any other pirate in history, commanded a series of ships he renamed Royal Fortune. Henry Every seized a heavily armed vessel called the Fancy and used it to execute one of the most audacious heists of the era, robbing the Mughal emperor's treasure fleet. But here's the thing about all these ships. They weren't built for pirates. They were stolen, seized from merchants, occasionally from Navy convoys, or simply abandoned. That means pirates inherited all the existing problems of those ships on top of adding their own. And wooden ships had a lot of problems. A wooden hull is not a sealed, static object. It breathes, it flexes in the waves. The planks shift with every movement of the ship. The seams between those planks, sealed with a material called oakum, which is essentially compressed hemp fiber soaked in tar, these seams open and close constantly. Every time a seam opens, water gets in. Not a little water, a lot of water. Every ship of the era had a bilge, the lowest internal space in the hull, and that bilge was always flooded. The question wasn't whether water was getting in, it was how fast. Here's a fact that should genuinely disturb you. On an aging wooden vessel, a crew might spend 2 to 3 hours every single day at the bilge pumps just to keep the ship from sinking. Not because of a storm, not because of battle damage, just because it was Tuesday. The bilge pump was typically a chain pump, an endless loop of discs or pistons connected to a chain run through a wooden cylinder. Sailors turned a handle at the top, and the mechanism pulled water up from the bottom of the ship and expelled it over the side. Sounds simple, but when that pump failed, when the chain broke, when the leather seals rotted, when the wood swelled and seized, you needed someone who could fix it immediately in the middle of the ocean with whatever materials happened to be on board. This is why pirates, despite their reputation for chaos, absolutely could not function without skilled tradespeople. Carpenters were so valued that they were sometimes forced into piracy rather than killed when a ship was taken. The same went for surgeons and navigators. If you had a skill that kept the crew alive, a pirate crew would rather have you working for them, willingly or not, than let you go. The carpenter was responsible for maintaining the hull, the pumps, the masts, and the internal wooden structure of the ship. He carried a toolkit of caulking irons, mallets, augers for drilling, and an assortment of spare timber. His job never stopped. But even the best carpenter couldn't fight what was waiting for them beneath the waterline. This is the part of the story that most people have never heard, and it's one of the most terrifying biological threats in maritime history. Meet Teredo navalis, the shipworm. It's not actually a worm. It's a bivalve mollusk related to clams and oysters. But it looks like a worm, it burrows like a worm, and it eats wood like nothing else on Earth. Teredo worms were the silent killers of the age of sail. They would attach to a ship's submerged wooden hull, burrow in through a tiny entry hole, often smaller than the head of a nail, and then expand inside the wood, creating tunnels up to 2 feet long. From the outside, the hull could look perfectly intact. From the inside, it would be riddled with channels, hollowed out, the structural integrity completely compromised. A ship left in warm tropical waters, the exact waters where pirates operated, could have its hull eaten to the consistency of a sponge within 6 months. And the Caribbean, where pirates like Anne Bonny and Calico Jack roamed, was particularly infested. Historians believe that Teredo worm damage may have contributed to the grounding of Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge in 1718 at Beaufort Inlet, North Carolina, though the full story remains debated. What's not debated is that hull degradation was a constant existential threat. So what did pirates do about it? They careened. Careening was one of the most physically demanding, time-consuming, and strategically dangerous activities in a pirate's life. Here's how it worked. You'd find a remote, secluded beach, ideally on an uninhabited island or a stretch of coast far from Navy patrols. You'd unload as much of the ship's cargo, cannons, and supplies as possible to make it lighter. Then, using the ship's own rigging, ropes attached to the mast and anchored to trees or stakes on shore, you'd haul the ship onto its side, careening it. One side of the hull would now be fully exposed, lifted out of the water. Then the real work began. The crew would scrape off everything that had accumulated on the hull, barnacles the size of your fist, masses of seaweed, and of course, the Teredo worm damage. They'd inspect every plank, every seam, every wooden joint. Rotten planks had to be pried off and replaced with fresh timber. Then came the treatment, and this is where it gets genuinely fascinating. The most common treatment for wooden hulls was a mixture of tallow, animal fat, usually from pigs or cattle, mixed with sulfur and tar. This paste was applied hot to the hull. It created a slick, foul-smelling coating that barnacles had difficulty gripping and that was toxic to shipworms. Some crews used lime, calcium oxide, applied to the hull before the tallow mixture. Others tried to burn off marine growth directly, a technique called graving, by lighting fires underneath the exposed wooden planking. None of these methods was perfect, but without them, the ship would be dead within a year. Here's the strategic nightmare. While a ship was careened, it was completely defenseless. It was lying on its side on a beach, its cannons were off, its hull was partially dismantled. If a Navy ship happened to sail past, you had no options, no escape, no fight. This is why pirate captains chose careening locations with extreme care, hidden coves, islands with narrow approaches, places where a lookout posted on a hill could give warning in time to at least arm the crew on the beach. Most major pirate crews careened every 4 to 6 months. In a year of active piracy, you might spend a combined 6 to 8 weeks on a beach doing nothing but maintenance. That's time you're not raiding, time you're not earning, time where everything can go wrong in an instant. Let's talk about rope. A ship in the golden age of piracy carried thousands of feet of rope, literally thousands. The rigging of a medium-sized vessel, the standing rigging that held the masts in place, the running rigging that controlled the sails, could weigh several tons when dry and significantly more when wet. Rope in this era was made from natural fiber, hemp primarily, and hemp rope, exposed to constant salt water, rain, sunlight, and mechanical stress, degraded rapidly. A rope left unattended would rot, it would fray, it would snap at the worst possible moment.
The main rigging, the shrouds that held the masts, was made from thicker, stronger rope that was tarred. That's right, literally soaked in pine tar. The tar waterproofed the rope, slowed rot, and made it stiffer and more resistant to chafing. It also made working with the rigging a miserable, sticky, black-handed experience for every sailor on board.
The running rigging, the lines that controlled the yards and sails, was lighter and not tarred because it needed to run freely through wooden blocks. These ropes needed to be spliced constantly. A splice is a repair where the frayed or broken end of a rope is woven back into itself or into another rope to restore strength. Skilled sailors could splice a rope faster than you can tie your shoes. On a pirate ship, this skill was used every single day.
Then there were the blocks, the wooden pulleys that the rigging ran through. These blocks were made from hardwood with a metal pin through the center and a sheave, a wooden wheel that the rope passed over. They needed to be greased regularly with tallow to keep them turning freely. A frozen, seized block in a critical line during a storm or a chase could mean the difference between life and death. And the sails themselves. Canvas sails were constantly torn by wind, stiffened by salt, weakened by sunlight. Sailmakers, another critically valued trade, spent hours every week with massive needles and waxed thread, repairing tears, reinforcing edges, and patching holes. A ship might go through several sets of sails in a year of heavy use.
Here's something that gets lost in the romance of piracy. The majority of deaths at sea during the Golden Age were not from battle. They were from disease, and the most common killer was entirely preventable: scurvy. Scurvy is caused by vitamin C deficiency. Without vitamin C, the human body can't produce collagen. Collagen is the structural protein that holds your tissues together. Without it, old wounds reopen, gums rot, teeth fall out, joints swell. The body essentially starts dissolving from the inside. In the 1700s, no one knew what caused it. They knew it happened on long voyages. They knew it killed enormous numbers of sailors. Some historians estimate that scurvy killed more sailors than storms, battles, and all other diseases combined. But the cure, citrus fruit specifically, wasn't officially understood and implemented by the Royal Navy until 1795. During the Golden Age of piracy, sailors were largely on their own. Pirates dealt with this primarily by raiding, not just for gold and cargo, but for food, fresh provisions, livestock, citrus. Any ship captured at sea was immediately searched for its food stores. Pirates who raided Spanish ships in the Caribbean often found citrus fruits used as trade goods, and crews lucky enough to seize these would see their health improve dramatically without fully understanding why. Fresh water was the other existential resource problem. Water was stored in wooden barrels called casks. These casks, no matter how well made, would eventually breed bacteria, grow algae, and turn the water brackish and foul. On a long voyage, the crew might be drinking water that smelled like rot and tasted like the barrel it came from. Rum was often added not just for morale, but because the alcohol had mild antimicrobial properties that marginally extended the drinkability of water. The maintenance challenge here was the casks themselves. Coopers, barrel makers, were yet another specialized trade that pirates desperately needed. A cracked or leaking cask didn't just lose water, it potentially contaminated the casks around it. Managing the water supply, monitoring the casks, knowing which were going bad first, this was a genuine logistical operation. Food itself deteriorated rapidly. Hardtack, a dense, rock-hard biscuit made from flour and water, was the staple. It could last for months, which was the point, but it became infested with weevils almost immediately in tropical climates. Most sailors learned not to look too closely at what they were eating in the dark. Salt pork and salt beef were also common, preserved in barrels of brine. When the salt ratio was off, the meat would putrefy. When it was right, it was at least safe, if nearly inedible. You can't talk about pirate ships without talking about cannons, but the romance of roaring guns obscures a brutal mechanical reality. Iron cannons were heavy, maintenance-intensive weapons,
Each cannon on a pirate vessel, and a well-armed ship like Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge carried up to 40, required constant attention. Iron rusts. In the saltwater environment of a ship at sea, iron rusts aggressively. Cannons had to be regularly cleaned, oiled, and inspected. The touch hole, the small opening through which the spark ignited the powder charge, was particularly vulnerable to corrosion. A corroded touch hole meant a cannon that misfired or didn't fire at all. In a battle, that failure could be fatal. The gun carriages, the wooden platforms on wheels that the cannons sat on, were also vulnerable. The wheels, called trucks, were made from hardwood. The axles were iron. The wooden frame absorbed enormous stress every time the cannon fired and recoiled. Loose trucks or cracked carriages had to be replaced before they failed in combat. The powder itself required careful management. Black powder is hygroscopic. It absorbs moisture from the air. Wet powder doesn't ignite. Powder stores on ships were kept as dry as possible in sealed copper or lead-lined magazines that prevented sparks and maintained temperature. This was one of the most technically demanding storage operations on the whole vessel, because a mistake didn't just mean damp powder, it meant an explosion that could destroy the entire ship. Gunpowder was also one of the most aggressively sought-after commodities during raids. Beyond gold and silver, beyond food and water, a pirate crew running low on powder was a pirate crew without teeth. Here's the thing about all of this maintenance. None of it happened automatically. It required organization, discipline, and ironically, it required a form of governance that was more democratic than almost anything existing on land in the early 1700s. Pirate crews operated under articles, written agreements that every member signed before joining. These articles laid out the rules, the share of plunder each rank received, and the penalties for breaking the code. They also spelled out compensation for injury. Lose your right hand in battle, you received a specified number of pieces of 8 as compensation. Lose your left eye, a different, smaller amount. This wasn't just generosity, it was rational crew management. If a skilled carpenter or a gunner or a surgeon knew he'd be compensated for injury, he was more willing to take risks. He stayed on the crew. He kept the ship running. Maintenance itself was assigned by role. The carpenter's mate tracked hull integrity in the pumps. The bosun, the boatswain, was responsible for the rigging, the anchors, and the ship's stores. The cook managed food and water supplies. What's remarkable is how much technical knowledge these roles required. These weren't simply laborers following orders. They were specialists with skills developed over years at sea, making real-time engineering decisions in some of the most demanding conditions human beings can face. We tend to think of pirates as outlaws, chaos personified, men who rejected all rules and order. But look at what they actually did. They took stolen ships, vessels already damaged, already aging, and kept them operational for months and years at a time, far from any infrastructure that could help them. They battled biological invasions from shipworms. They battled physics every time the hull flexed and took on water. They managed food, water, medicine, gunpowder, rope, timber, and tar across thousands of miles of open ocean, with no supply chain, no backup, and no room for error. The golden age of piracy produced some of history's most infamous criminals, but it also produced some of history's most resourceful engineers. The next time you see a pirate ship in a movie, sitting beautifully on the ocean with its black sails and gleaming hull, know that maintaining that ship was a full-time, grueling, technically demanding operation that never stopped. Not in fair weather, not in calm seas, not even at anchor. The ocean is always trying to win. The pirates just refuse to let it.
If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel. It really helps the video reach more members of our YouTube family.